Good afternoon. My name is Flip Troiano. I'm a recovering emergency room physician, I should say, and now practicing functional and functional and emergency medicine. Well, it's really functional and integrative medicine. How I got here in fact, how I got to the emergency room was I love to solve problems. I've spent more than 25 years in the emergency room and realized that I was not solving many problems anymore. I was putting Band-Aids on chronic issues that were coming back monthly and sometimes even weekly. I began to look, is there a better way? And there is. That's what got me to functional medicine. When I started to look, I found we have the science, we have the technology to really begin analyzing and fixing some of the problems that we have. But change is difficult. You know that. I know that. If you had talked to me 15 years ago, I'd have been one of the docs that said, you don't even need multivitamins if you're eating a well-balanced meal. Wow, but you know what? When I started to look, that's probably not true. Change is difficult. So given that in mind, let's begin to address the topic today. Is our food failing us? The easy answer to that is yes. The real answer to that is, like in any relationship, it's complicated. Sorry, we got to figure out how the technology here. Whenever you have a complicated issue, though, what you want, I'm going to give you a structure to think about as we go through the talk, because there'll be lots of details. You don't have to remember all of the details, but what I want you to do is remember these three important points. There are problems with our food. We've actually partially answered the first question already. Our food has a partner in crime, and there are solutions to the problem. And actually, there's one other thing, and Norm stole my thunder this morning, but here, 1/4 of what we eat keeps you alive, and the other 3/4 keeps your doctor alive. Now remember, so think about this. We've been having problems with our food for thousands of years, because this was from a hieroglyph on an Egyptian tomb. The issues that we're having now have started a long time ago. So how do we approach this sort of thing? Well, today what we're going to do is we're going to be scientists. You and I are going to be scientists. We're going to be scientists like maybe Linus Pauling, and we're going to approach the subject. Well, we would like to be like Linus Pauling, but we may be more like this gentleman. So what does a scientist do? How does a scientist approach a problem? Well, the first thing that a scientist does is they ask a question. So why is our food so important? What does it really do? Now, just so we don't leave, because we don't want to leave anybody behind, what I'm going to do is give a short course here on the physiology and biochemistry of the digestive and energy production systems 101 in 3 minutes. And now I know when you look at a slide like this, I know you know everything on that slide, and when you look at the bottom right, the citric acid cycle, or if you're my generation, it was the Krebs cycle. Don't worry about it. It's not on the midterm, but it will be on the final. So how do we begin? Let's start out with, what are we? It seems to be a simple question, but I'm going to look at it. We're going to look at it today as scientists from a different thing. We are not just a single entity. What we are is a collection of cells. Now that's a picture, an electron microscope of a single cell. We are 10 trillion cells. But in fact, we're much more than that. We are also 100 trillion bacteria. Each of us has 100 trillion bacteria. So what we are is a combination of 10 trillion cells and 100 trillion bacteria, which is a fascinating sort of thing. We could give a talk all on that. But if you think about that, we're outnumbered 10 to 1. But these are important issues. Let's look at it this way. We are 110 trillion cells, but what we are is 110 trillion factories, because each of those cells is working really hard. So think about that. I mean, it's a good analogy. Each cell, it's got a control room, it's got a packaging center, it makes things, it burns energy, it's got a waste removal system. Each cell in our body, our cells and our bacteria do that. So in order for our system to work well, what we need to do is keep the factory going. Well, how do we do that? Well, first thing is we have to give our factory raw materials, right? So we have to give it food, water, air, and toxins. Well, I guess we don't have to give it toxins, but we do give it toxins, so we have to deal with those issues. Once we give it those things, what does it do? Well, again, another simple thing, 3 things to remember. Our cells, our factories, only do 3 things. They either burn it for energy, they store it, or they make things. Take sugar. If we take glucose, what do? We burn it for energy, or we throw it into our fat cells as storage. Take proteins. You can also burn protein for energy, but we can also use it to make things. So we build structure. Now, the last thing that we do is when we have toxins and or breakdown products and or things that we're not storing or burning for energy, is we have to deal with our waste management system. So now that we have that, let's look at if our factories then aren't working correctly or we're mismanaging our resources, what happens? Well, think about that little factory in there. It's a high energy system. It's kind of like a utility, an energy utility. We make energy. In fact, but we're much, much better. Our cell is much, much better. A cell is 99% efficient, which on the other hand, that means that 1% of everything we run through there for energy ends up as excess electrons. Those excess electrons get stuck on oxygen, and they cause oxidative stress. Now, this has been going on for millennia, and our cells have developed buffers to handle that oxidative stress. But if there's excess oxidative stress, what happens? Well, think of it as a hot potato. Now, you get an extra electron, I throw it onto that oxygen, and that oxygen goes, I don't want it, what do we do with it? Well, if it can't deal with, the buffer system can't deal with it, what does it do? It dumps it on DNA and RNA. So in fact, we injure the cell's RNA and DNA. When that happens, what happens? Well, you get decreased function or non-functional protein synthesis. So the hormones your cell makes aren't made correctly, or you make less of them. The neurotransmitters that it makes, or you make less of them. Eventually, we get cell mutation, and eventually you get cell death. This is what oxidative stress does. And why is oxidative stress important? Well, because oxidative stress is one of the 3 major mechanisms that our body has with dealing with outside stresses. If you think about it, there's an infinite number of stresses that go on that attack our body. We have 3 ways of dealing with it. One of them is increased oxidative stress, and we just kind of went through what oxidative stress does. One of them is inflammation. Well, this is Grumpy Gus. He's not very happy because all of his joints hurt. And 2 is immune dysfunction. We're seeing a significant increase in autoimmune diseases. How this ties in with what we're talking about today is that how we deal with things are all mediated by our macronutrient and our micronutrient imbalance. So now we're beginning to tie it to food. Now we're done with the course. Final exam will be later. What we need to do now is look at, so if this is there a real problem? So clinically, are we seeing problems? And the answer is yes, we are. I'm just going to go through a series of slides here which kind of show you what's happening. When you look on the left there, the chronic illnesses have been increasing over rapidly. This is a 20-year period of time. You can see we've had increases in diabetes, heart disease, cancer, cardiovascular disease. Alzheimer's rates, the left half of the table is currently what's happened. The right half of that table is projections. The projected increase in Alzheimer's disease, the rate at which it's increasing is getting worse. And then the last one is obesity rates. Now, we live in a world where we want to be the best. We want to do the most. This is a situation where it's not working for us. This is extremely frightening. Look at this. In 2009, 35% of the population in the U.S. was labeled obese, meaning their body mass index is greater than 30. We look at Italy. We're 7 times more obesity here than at Italy. And the question is, outside of the fact that we're bigger, is it a problem? And the answer is yeah, it's been studied. Obesity increases oxidative stress and inflammation. Body mass index is an independent marker for oxidative stress, and we already went through what oxidative stress does. Belly fat, and you heard a little bit more about this morning, belly fat leads to increased oxidative stress, increased lipids, increased blood pressure, increased interleukins and IL-6, and those are terms for the substance in your body that increase inflammation. Insulin resistance, increased estrogen and androgen production, and the last one, secretion of adipokines. Adipokines are substances, essentially little hormones put out by a fat cell that make you eat more. They're addicted. It's like, here, we want more. So you have increased fat. The more fat you have, the more adipokines you have, the more you eat. So now let's begin to look at, so now clearly there's clinical changes. So how has our food changed? We're going to look at it both from a macronutrient, which is the percent carbs, proteins, and fats we have, and we'll look at each of those groups, and then we're going to look at it from a micronutrient stance. Our macronutrient changes, this is what's happened globally over the last 36 years. Well, the first problem is right at the top. We've increased our food energy, the amount of food we eat, by 22%. No wonder where we have an obesity issue. But in addition to this, our carbohydrates have, or not so much in addition to this, but as a breakdown for that, we've increased our carbohydrates by 20%, our proteins by 14%, and our total fats by 23%. How did this start? Well, we started with the food pyramid that was given to us in the 1990s. It recommended that half of our calories come from carbohydrates. Now, we won't even argue whether that's good or bad, but we will talk about the fact that we ignored an extremely important part of what they gave us initially. It said that more than 50% of our carbohydrates should be from whole grains. Here, who here in the room eats more than 50% of their carbohydrates from whole grains? We have one good gentleman, or two maybe. The issue ends up being when you look at it when you look at how much actual whole grains we do, population-wise, it's 16%. Oops. We were given good instructions, we're just not following them. How does that affect us? Now, I mean, things can really be insidious. Now, think about this. 10 calories. Now, we talk about excess. Now, if we store, remember, there's three things we do. We can burn it, we can store it, or we can build something with it. If we store an extra 10 calories a day, that's 1.1 grams. If in a year, that's 406 grams. Now, for those of us who are metrically challenged, 406 grams is 0.9 pounds. Now, 0.9 pounds even doesn't seem a lot, does it? But if you think about that, it's a pound. And in 10 years, it means we will have accumulated in excess 9 pounds. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like the last 9 pounds that I put on in the last 10 years, and I don't want to put on another 9 pounds. And this isn't very much. This is a protein bar. Protein bar, what's the average protein bar? 200 calories? So what we're talking about is storing 1/20th of this. See how insidious this can be over time? So now let's go to look at some of the specific macronutrients. Let's look at fatty acids. Now we're going to learn a little bit about fatty acids. I know you've heard some of those terms. Saturated fats on the top. And look at the reason that I put the pictures, not so you can memorize the molecule, but look at how straight it is. The difference between that and the unsaturated, the reason it's unsaturated is that it has one or more double bonds. When you put a double bond in, the molecule bends. So it becomes pliable. Now think about this. If I took a plastic bag and I threw in a handful of toothpicks, that would be like throwing in saturated fats. And I shake that bag around, eventually one of those toothpicks is going to poke through the wall. That's kind of what it does to a cell wall. When you put trans fats in trying to incorporate it into your cell walls, they poke through. When you give it unsaturated fats, it's kind of like filling that plastic bag with al dente noodles. So you know what? They're not going to poke through, but they're going to be pliable. The difference between the middle and the bottom is trans fats, and the trans fats look almost like saturated fats, don't they? The difference is where the hydrogen molecules end up being. Now, the saturated fats are butter, coconut, cow's milk, palm oil, things like that. The unsaturated fats are the monounsaturated with one double bond is essentially, think olive oil. But what we're going to talk about mostly is the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. And we're going to see what's happened to that, because we have a significant problem. The availability of omega-6s and omega-3 fats has changed. When you look at this starts at 1909 on the left hand of the table, but we're going to start, go to the middle. Do I have a pointer? Go to the middle, just to the right of year, and it's 1969. We've had a significant increase in soybean. Now, why is that a problem, other than the fact that we have 23% more fats in our diet? It's a problem because soybean is 60% omega-6 versus olive oil, which you see the yellow on the bottom there, is only 20% omega-6. This is another way to look at this. The very top line here, I don't know whether you can see, is as linoleic acid. It's an omega-6. The bottom three lines on there are your omega-3s. How does this happen? Well, one of the ways that this has happened is what we've done to our beef. We've essentially now feed all of our beef grain in feedlots. When you look at the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 in the beef, it's at least 10 to 1. And in fact, this is very conservative. In addition to that, when you go to one of the food chains here, which is very proud of their beef, and they say, yes, well, our beef is mostly grass-fed. Well, that sounds good, but what they do is they grain feed it the last 2 months. Well, look at what happens. If you look at 56 and go up from there, you'll find that in 2 months, you decrease the omega-6 in the animals by 50%. Why am I making a big deal about omega-6 and omega-3? Complicated slide, but what I want you to do is just look at the left in the omega-6 pathway. When you break down omega-6s, go all the way down to the bottom of the pathway into the circle, and what you find is that these are cytokines that are inflammatory. So when you give too much omega-6, it runs down that pathway and ends up producing things that are inflammatory. When you go down the omega-3 pathway on the right, what you get is a substance that's not inflammatory. From a evolutionary standpoint, when you look at the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, it's been 2 to 1 a long time ago. 50 years ago, it was 10 to 1. Now it ends up being 25 to 1, and sometimes more. And how does this show itself clinically? Well, I have a patient who 2 years ago called me the day after Valentine's Day in tears, saying that her hip hurt so much that she could barely get to the bathroom. Now, this is a person who was scheduled to have hip surgery and actually had been postponed for several months, so it was worried. And so we talked a little bit and found out that what had happened is the night before, her husband had taken her out to dinner, and they'd eaten at Carnivore downtown, had great steaks. And I said, well, you know what, it's the omega-6s, the high omega-6s that you got in the meats last night. And she said, no. And so we talked a little more, and then 6 weeks later, now you have to realize this is a good friend. 6 weeks later, I get a telephone call. I don't get a hello. I get a, I hate you. I go, what's this about? She said, we went out last night again, and I had some really good lamb chops, and I had to crawl to the bathroom this morning. My hip hurt so much. I said, well, I'm sorry, don't kill the messenger about this. She's since had her hip replaced. So that doesn't bother her, but she continues to notice that when she has fatty red meats, she has other aches in her joints. This is a real live situation that we all have to deal with. What do omega-3s do? Omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. When you give them, grumpy Gus goes away. They're antihypertensive. They support cell membrane structure. They support vascular tone and integrity so that you're not getting plaque and you're not getting clotting. Again, another way to look at the fact that this is the number of scopes done for osteoarthritis is the blue. There's been an astronomical increase in the past 20 plus years. Omega-6s and omega-3s are a problem. Now let's go to trans fats. Now, we talked about, they were mentioned a little bit this morning, developed in this century, can be done by heating normal cis fats, which means that if you take normal fats and heat them too high in a frying pan, you'll actually convert them to trans fats. So you have to be careful. But why are they there? Because they're creamy, they're rich tasting, there's less spoilage, and they have a long shelf life. And you know what? They taste good. What's the problem with trans fats? Well, the trans fats increase all of our bad lipids, LDL, triglycerides, endothelial dysfunction, insulin resistant, and they decrease our good lipids. They decrease our HDL. The bottom of this will show you what they actually studied it. 6 years, they took 2 matched groups. They gave them same total calories in each group and the same percent fat. But one group had 8% more trans fats in their diet. What happened? Well, and how much is 8%? 8% is equivalent to 1 burger and fries per day. Now, it's probably not the triple bypass burger you see in the upper right, but it's still 1 burger and 1 fries difference. They gained an extra 5.4% body fat, which is, on a 150-pound person, we're talking 7-8 pounds of increased body fat compared to the other group, eating the same fats and same total diet. In addition to that, they gained more abdominal fat, which we know is bad, and they increased their risk of diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Now, we heard that the FDA is going to be eliminating or banning trans fats. Well, they've already labeled it, and we've done pretty well with the fact that over the past 10 years, since it's been labeled, our amount of trans fats has been decreased. But the problem is that the FDA fails Math 101. This is something from a label that says trans fats are 0. Well, the FDA failed. You and I know that 0 equals nothing, right? The FDA doesn't know that. The FDA says that when manufacturers label food, 0 is really less than 0.5, which means 0.49 is less than 0.5. So if you and I, for each meal, eat 2 things that are labeled as 0 trans fats, but really have 0.49 in it, it means at the end of the day we've had 6 times 0.49, so we have 3 grams of trans fats. There's a problem, and we might not even know it. Now let's go to our carbohydrates, the next part of our macronutrients. Now we'd all like to be eating on the right side of the table. Well, not quite all the way onto the right because we're not eating wood, but we should be eating more of the complex and green vegetables. And even when you go to the middle, remember there's whole grains there. Well, we were told in the 90s 50% of our carbohydrates supposed to come from that category. Well, it doesn't, which means that we're eating on the sugars and simple starches. And what we're going to do is begin to look at this. Here, what happens, this is what's happened with the sugars in the past 30 years. We've significantly increased our high fructose corn syrup. Is that a problem? Yeah, it's a problem. Look at the table on the right. This is a table of newly diagnosed diabetes by year, starting in 1980 and going to 2011. That's scary. Now, it's scary. It's scary in part because of the fact that this is a problem that didn't just start in 1995 when it starts to go up. It started 20 years before that, or 10 years before that, because diabetes doesn't develop overnight. It develops over a long period of time. And you can see in the left-hand table that along with this, we're seeing increased heart disease and stroke. And sugar, as our sugar consumption's going up. Now let's go and talk a little bit about the micronutrients, the things that are in the macronutrients that we're eating. So the vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. Phytonutrients are the things that give our foods color. Let's look at this. 4 tables: spinach, collards, corn, and beets. You don't have to look at individual things. Look at the trends. The red is what was happening in 1960. The blue is what's happening in 2000. You can see out of the 20-some graphs there's only 3 where we've actually increased our micronutrient content. All of the others are similar or down. Another way to look at this would be that this is the change in micronutrient that we were taking in as a population from 1990 to 2006. Essentially, everything's down except for niacin. An example of this, let's look at apples a little bit. Our wild apples have, which is over on the left, have an amazing amount of antioxidant or phytonutrients in them. Our standard apples, which is halfway through the table, don't have nearly as much. That doesn't mean that our apples are bad, but it means And in part, if we want just to look at it from a phytonutrient standpoint, we should eat crab apples. They don't taste so good, though. So we're stuck over on the other side, but there's things that we can do to make it better. First of all, make sure you're eating the skins. In an experiment, eating the skins with the apple will give you 50% more phytonutrients. Same thing for blueberries. A great story. Frederick Colville and Elizabeth White commercialized blueberry production in 1915. They started out, there were thousands of varieties. They actually narrowed it down to 100 by offering people $3 for a good bush of blueberries, which is equivalent to about $100. What an interesting marketing idea. What they did is they then rejected the darkest skins, unfortunately, because they thought that the lighter ones looked fresher, and they picked the biggest berries. So those are two things that essentially move them to the least nutrient-dense bushes. They got 6 plants of that, of which all of our blueberries now come from that. Blueberries are still good. On the other hand, if you really want good, we can still actually get the Rubel blueberry, which is one of the original 6, which has a significantly higher antioxidant content than the others. There are things, though, that you and I can do to make things better. One of them is we can cook them. Cooking blueberries a little bit helps release some of the antioxidant content, and that's better. And drying them doesn't. Now, we live in Wisconsin. Who likes dried cherries? Door County cherries or raisins? Extremely high glycemic index and significant decrease in the antioxidant value. To summarize micronutrients, this is just a table of looking at both minerals and vitamins. We're not doing very well. This is what percentage of the recommended daily allowance are we getting. In fact, we're not getting 100% of the recommended daily allowance in anything. And in fact, when you really look at it, the recommended daily allowance may not be adequate to prevent us from getting diseases or to keep us as healthy as we want to be. So now let's go to the next big thing, food processing. Now, is food processing bad, and when did it start? Well, food processing began 1 million years ago, because anything we do to our food is processing it. So there's evidence that 800,000 years ago that we began to cook food. But we're not going to look at the whole table. We'll go to the important things. Let's go to 7,000 years ago, the Sumerians, 40% of all of their grain went for beer production. We know where their priorities were. And that we'll go to probably the most important is down towards the bottom of the table. In 1900 BC, in Central America, they began to process cacao beans, so we got chocolate. And we have to know where your priorities are, right? In addition to that, in 500 AD, we started to get crystal sugar. Society has been using sugar for a long time. It was just in liquid form. Now we get to some of the problem areas. What have we done in the 19th and 20th centuries? In 1908, we developed MSG, both in Germany and Japan. MSG, or glutamate, is a problem substance. It's neuroexcitatory. It basically drives your neurons in your brain, and it inflames them. There's so many things that we have MSG in right now, especially in the world that we're in, where we're stressed all of the time. Now what we're doing is we're taking in foods that are revving our system and stressing us more and causing more inflammation. In addition to that, in 1956, we developed high fructose corn syrup, and we've addressed those issues before. So what have we done in this 20th century? We've developed spray drying, juice concentrates, freeze drying, artificial sweeteners, coloring agents, chemical preservatives. And what did we get from that? What we got is our SAD diet, our typical standard American diet, which is sad. Potato chips, pretzels, cookies, soft drinks, fruits and vegetables that are preserved, processed meats, canned soups, and frozen pizza. We do have some problems. Now, is food processing bad? Not all of it. We get some good benefits from it. You know what? Food processing removes toxins. It allows foods to be transported across long distances. I mean, we eat lots of different things now that we get from halfway around the world. We couldn't do that without some food processing. It increases food consistency. It increases the yearly availability of foods. It decreases the bad bugs in the food and decreases spoilage. And it reduces the incidence of foodborne diseases. All of that's good. We're happy with those things. It also decreases the amount of time that it takes us to cook. Now, let's go to the far end of the spectrum. What's the far end of the spectrum? We've heard things about raw diet. The raw diet's good. On the other hand, is its time, I mean, even eating it is time consuming. When you look at the chimpanzee or the great ape, they spend up to 40% of their day chewing. Now, one could say they're eating a raw diet, it's very healthy. Well, but I don't have 40% of my day to spend chewing. So you need to have some food processing. Food processing also can add extra nutrients such as vitamins. Really? Well, yes, they can, but I'm not sure that this should be in benefits or adverse effects. Let's look at an example here. This is what happens with flour. When you process flour, what you see in the second column there is it's unenriched. Significant decreases in all vitamins. Now, when we enrich it, what do? We add vitamins back. Well, we add 3 vitamins back. So we add thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, which in part may be why we're seeing an increase in niacin. But the point is we're still deficient in 9 different vitamins that were there initially that we processed out. So the adverse effects from food additives, sugars, we talked about those, trans fats, MSG, carrageenan. Anybody know what carrageenan is? Have you seen carrageenan? It's becoming more prevalent. Carrageenan is a substance that is used for thickener. You'll find it in almond milk, soy milk, yogurt, ice cream, and even starting to see it in some solid foods. Why is it a problem? Carrageenan mimics lipopolysaccharide, which is a breakdown product from gram-negative bacteria. So normally what happens, you get gram-negative bacteria in our gut, your body breaks it down, you get lipopolysaccharide, that gets picked up by our immune system. So now what we're doing is we're giving carrageenan in a whole bunch of foods. What does it do? It looks to our immune system like a gram-negative bacteria and a lipopolysaccharide endotoxin. It activates our immune system. Things yogurt that should be good for us actually can be causing problems. In addition to that, you can get contamination from there's chemicals, large batch, heavy metal contamination, and potential cross-contamination with wheat. In addition to that, there's nutrient loss. And remember, we said we got out bad bacteria, but you know what? We're taking out good bacteria also. And remember what we are. We are 10 trillion cells, but 100 trillion bacteria. We need our good bacteria. So, there are problems with our food. Our cows are grain-fed, and the meat is too high in omega-6s, and we found out why. There are too many of our foods that are supplemented with trans fats. Now, that's hopefully being at least partially fixed, but it's still a problem, and you can make it worse at home by turning your cis fats into trans fats in the frying pan. And our processed foods are nutrient deficient. Our food has a partner in crime. And it's not just Monsanto, it's us. Because of the things that we do. We know some of these things. We've increased our energy consumption by 22% in the last 36 years. We eat too much omega-6 and too little omega-3s. We eat too many simple sugars, and we eat too much processed and nutrient-deficient food. Now, I know that's slightly repetitive, but the solutions to the problems are fixes for that. But there are things that, and the important part of that is there's things that you and I can do. We may not be able to get the large food companies to change things, but we can eliminate trans fats by not eating them. We can decrease our omega-6s. We can increase our omega-3 intake, and we can decrease our simple sugars. How do we do this? How we do it is, in part, you got to eat a little bit less. In part, we have to eat smart. Read the labels. Begin by analyzing your nutritional intake. Identify nutritional excesses and deficiencies. Consider your environmental stresses and toxins, and evaluate your unique biochemistry. If you need help with that, that's what functional and integrative medicine can help with. But you can't also forget that you also need to move more. And in conclusion, I think it was best stated by Fran Lebowitz, we have to remember food is an important part of a balanced diet. Thank you much. What do we have? What are we doing time-wise, and do we have question time? I thought? Ooh, I did this faster than usual. All right, questions? Yes. Yes.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I've been doing some reading on, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, interestrified fats.
Mm-hmm.
As a replacement for the trans fats, and that they're not good. Do you have any comments or thoughts on that?
Again, I think that really the way to think about this is we're going to keep it simple. Huh?
I understand that. I'm just trying to learn about it because I know that they don't, it's not like it says necessarily in the ingredient list for people that what kind of fat it may say, that hydrogenated and
Yeah, and it has to do. It sort of has to do with what you're doing with that chemical bond and where the hydrogens are on it. And in reality, for most of us, before you even get and worry about that, what you have to do is go back to the large issues. We need to fix the large issues first, and the large issues are what are we doing with our omega-6s, and what percentage of omega-6s to omega-3s do you have? Eliminating trans fats as best you can. The intraesterified, again, I'd rather have you be getting cis fats than not. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm not sure if I heard you right, quite a ways back, you said high heat can convert.
Yeah, what happens is, remember the difference between a trans and a cis fat is it's essentially, it's what side that hydrogen is on. And what happens is by heating things, you can actually change the chemistry.
So are there certain fats you should?
Well, actually the way to I think the easiest way to do this, if you heat all of your fats too high, you'll turn them into trans fats.
So I need to be using.
Well, the way to do it is to look. If you go to the internet and you look at the smoke point, you'll be able to find multiple different areas where they have smoke points for fats. As long as you don't get to that smoke point, you're not actually converting the fat. So, in part, how do you deal with? Olive oil. If you heat it, you lose value from your olive oil. So if you heat it too much. So what you do is you don't put it in the frying pan on high and leave it there until it's smoking. What you do is you get your frying pan, a little warm. You put a little olive oil in, put your stuff in, do it quickly, and get it out. And at that point in time, you haven't converted your fats. Yes, ma'am.
Also called good bacteria intake, like we do acidophilus and metabolic. Do we need it, or it's just new fat?
We need it. The simple answer to that is we need it. And in part, it comes from the fact that we used to be getting our vegetables from the farm. We'd pick them out of the garden. What do? You sort of simply wash the carrots off a little bit, but not. You were actually getting bacteria along with that. Since everything's been processed now, we've lost a lot of that. What you do, and the answer to the answer is, do we actually have a solid scientific answer for that? And the answer is, no, it's still pretty soft. We need more. There's lots of stuff out there showing that many of our chronic inflammatory diseases can be improved by added probiotic. In fact, there's some stuff out there saying you need lots of probiotic. Now, what you'll be able to get on the store is a billion bacteria, 3 billion bacteria. There's some things in the literature that say as much as 500 billion bacteria may be needed. There's also some things saying that certain bacteria may work better for other things than other. That's not, this stuff is not written in stone yet. I think that if you were to say you're going to take a probiotic on a regular basis, that would not be a problem. I would probably change it intermittently. Every couple of months, change to a different one. Is there good science behind all of that? Not 100%, but we're getting there. Question? Yes, sir.
You count on buffalo as being grass-fed.
If they're not being feedlot fed with grain, yes.
No.
I, yeah, I mean, I think the thing to do, part of the thing to do is to start, we all have to become informed consumers. So who do you buy your buffalo from? Ask them. If they say that they don't know, ask where are they getting it from. You can call and ask. I mean, we're getting to the point now where you can attempt to get some of those answers. Yes. Any other questions? Yes.
What's your take on coconut oil?
Coconut oil, again, each of the oils out there, and coconut oil, is okay. You have to. I actually don't remember right off at this point in time the percent of omega-6 and omega-3 in it. First of all, it can be heated a little bit. It can be heated hotter. So that's probably one of the better oils to cook in. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Since you're talking about the ratios of omega-3 and omega-6s, do you have just a couple of key, like, things that you tell people to start shifting that ratio back to where it should be?
If you're going to eat red meats, eat grass-fed red meats. I mean, that's sort of the primary thing. You have to decrease your. I mean, if you're a person that's eating lots of fast food, you really have to. You have to start to switch back to a more fruit and vegetable-based diet. I'm not saying take meats out completely. Meats and proteins are important. You have to have adequate proteins. You can always, one of the things you can always do is, if you're having trouble changing your diet, is you can add omega-3 supplements. Now, you have to be careful that you're not just adding fish oil, because if you go to the pharmacy and get 1,000 milligrams of, and get a bottle that says 1,000 milligrams of fish oil, you have to turn it around and look and actually see how much DHA and EPA is in it. What you'll find is that 60% of the time in that 1,000 milligram fish oils, there'll only be 300 milligrams of there'll be 180 milligrams of EPA and 120 milligrams of DHA. The average person out there should probably be having 2 grams a day of omega-3s, which means if you're taking if there's only 300 milligrams, you got to take 7 of them. Now, you can find things that have 950 milligrams. But it depends. Do you have cardiac issues? Do you have other inflammatory issues? At which point in time, then you can increase that. There was a question in the back. The what? Yes.
What would be that ratio, DHA, EPA, what you would need daily? What you would need to supplement type?
The ratio of DHA to EPA, or the
Generally, number, minimal.
what? Here again, in functional medicine, you kind of like to do this individualized. But for an adult, you could easily pick a number and say every adult should be on 2 grams of omega-3s a day. Now, if you specifically want to look at what part of that should be EPA and what part of that should be DHA, that's unclear. When you look at the studies, most of the studies have been done with the EPA and DHA ratio of 3 to 2. There's probably evidence in the literature suggests that we're better off with more DHA. And the reason is, if we could go back to that slide, the reason is DHA comes lower in the chain, and what happens is, in order to get from ALA down to eventually EPA down to DHA, there's multiple steps that it has to go through. Some of those are slow, and some of those actually steal enzymes from your other pathways. So, I mean, that becomes a complicated question. Even if you ask the functional medicine docs that are the scientists that are working on this, you'll get different answers. I personally think that DHA is probably a higher percentage of DHA is the way to go. Yes.
Where do we get 'em?
You can get you can get you can get them from Vitamin Shop. You can get them. There's a company out there called Solgar that has 950 milligrams, and then there are companies, Orthomolecular. The companies like Orthomolecular, Thorne, some of the others. And you have to look at. Then we get into. You have to be careful. What are good and what's not good? That's not an easy question to answer. There's a site out there called consumerlabs.com that rates over-the-counter supplements. On the other hand, there's a suit against them saying that they favor people who pay them. What? So how do I as a consumer do this, and how do you as a consumer and I as a practitioner do this? It's a difficult thing to do. From a practitioner standpoint, I have several companies like Orthomolecular, Thorne, Designs for Health that I'm pretty sure their quality assurance is very, very good. So my tendency is to go with them. And if you come to me as a patient, I'm going to recommend them because as a physician, I have to say these are the people that I trust from a standpoint. I can't verify other things. They're also going to be a little bit more expensive. Now, I take 4 grams a day of omega-3s. I started out a while ago taking some of the Solgar. Now I bumped most of it to the others, but you know what? Sometimes I still take the Solgar. It hasn't harmed me. Yes.
We just want to increase fish, 3 times a week to eat fish, and the ocean saltwater fish now has high amount of mercury. So is it better safer freshwater fish versus saltwater fish?
Yes, no, I don't know. The real answer to this is you, first of all, especially from a fish standpoint, you probably don't want farmed fish. When you look at it, one of the things we eat salmon because we know it's high in omega-3s, right? When you look at the amount of omega-3s in ocean-caught fish versus farm, it can be as low as in the farm, as low as 50% less. And in part, and why do you think that happens? It's because they put them they're sort of in pens, enclosed pens, and guess what they feed them? High fructose corn syrup. They're essentially feeding them the same thing they're feeding their cows. So their omega-3s go down. Now, mercury, you would think that the stuff wild caught from the Pacific is going to have less mercury just because it's got a much larger distribution of water to dissolve in. Is that true? I'm not sure that we actually have the good studies to answer that definitely. Bob.
Just to clarify something about coconut oil, the reason why it's so wonderful, the answer is it's 91% saturated, but remember there's a lot of short chain, medium chain triglyceride
Glyceride.
fats. So those are great for the brain. 6% mono, which would be like olive oil, right? And only 3% polyunsaturated, very few is omega-6. So this is why it's such a
Yeah.
good oil.
Great. Good. Thank you, Bob. Thank you all. I hope you're enjoying the conference.